All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the CRC Speaker Series. I hope everyone is well. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us here in person, and of course, those of you joining us online, and by extension, those of you who will be watching the review because you cannot catch us live. All right, this evening, we're bringing to you a very distinguished speaker, speaking on a very timely subject of Caribbean security and security concerns. First, I want to welcome and mention the sponsorship of the Guyana Business Journal, who is co-sponsoring this evening's event. And so we thank them and we look forward to partnering with them as we move forward. Right, with no further ado, first I want to invite to the podium a representative from the Guyana Business Journal and a faculty member here at the Medgar College of the City University of New York, Dr. Terrence Blackman. Dr. Blackman, please.
Thank you, Dr. Irish Bramble. It's a pleasure to be here this evening and to bring greetings on behalf of the Guyana Business Journal. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this important forum hosted by the Caribbean Research Center at Griffith College. Today's discussion on Caribbean sovereignty promises an insightful dialogue on critical issues like drug trafficking, crime, terrorism, and cyber threats that impact our region. The Guyana Business Journal is proud to be a part of this conversation. We stand at a crossroads where external and internal forces challenge the very fabric of our Caribbean nations. Yet, it is sort of gatherings like this that demonstrate our commitment to facing these challenges head on. We can, if we've done effectively, leverage the collective knowledge to build a stable and prosperous Caribbean by fostering the collaboration between academics, industry, and the challenges that we face. The Guyana Business Journal would like to extend a special welcome to Dr. Antoinette Coleman, Provost at Griffith College, whose leadership fosters this kind of space where scholarship meets action. And we also eagerly anticipate Professor Griffith's keynote address. His insights on regional threats are more than academic. They inspire us all to act for a stronger Caribbean. And so as we conclude, let us remember our shared vision, a Caribbean that stands strong amidst global challenges. Let us also commit to fostering collaboration between the academic world and the industry world. And let this be a key pillar of our efforts, our collective efforts, to build a stable and prosperous Caribbean. Thank you, and let's have a productive and perhaps transformative meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blackman. I forgot to mention, Dr. Blackman is also the chair of mathematics here at Medgar College. This time, I'd also like to invite to the podium our esteemed academic leader and provost here at Medgar College, and a strong supporter of the Caribbean Research Center and all of the work that we do. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Antoinette.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Irish Bramble. And always, as always, thank you, Dr. Blackman. It is always nice to hear that we are always talking about the Caribbean. And why that is so important to me, that is where my great-grandparents are from, Barbados. And when I was small, they would always say, you may be in the US, but the key thing is all of us started at a big continent, and as the ship moved along, it stopped at different places. So we are all one brethren and one sisterhood, and we should always remember that. And Dr. Irish Bramble, with the Center for Caribbean Research, is always working to bring dialogue to Medgar Evers College, to be able to know what is happening beyond Medgar Evers College. And tonight, as we listen, as I always say, listen to the dialogue of our speaker, we will transform ourselves, as Dr. Blackman said, into understanding more and more that we are one people. So tonight, on behalf of President Patricia Ramsey, I would like to welcome you to Medgar Evers College. And she always says that social justice is in our DNA. Well, our DNA is all through the Caribbean and all through the United States and all through Canada and all through all of the continents that we serve. Please listen carefully and enjoy our speaker for this evening. And thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coleman, as always, for your remarks and your continued support of our efforts. This evening, we are honored to bring you one of the region's most distinguished scholars, someone who has actually impacted some of my work. As you may or may not know, part of my studies have been on security issues and political violence in the Caribbean. And while I was working on my dissertation, certainly one of the names that came up quite often was Dr. Ivelaw Griffith. Just a brief bit, he has quite a distinguished history, but amongst his accomplishments, Dr. Ivelaw Griffith has served as the 10th Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana. He has a strong and long relationship with us here at the City University, having served as Provost at York College. In addition, he has been the Executive in Residence at the University of Albany. He's here this evening, having recently published a new publication, which we will highlight towards the end of this program. All right, with no further ado, I would like to invite to the stage none other than Professor Ivelaw Griffith, who will be speaking on challenged sovereignty, the challenges of security facing the Caribbean.
He needs another round of applause. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Griffith.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Griffith.
I can't hear you if you don't respond to me. And all Caribbean people know how to respond.
You know.
I want to begin by thanking Dr. Irish Bramble, Professor Irish Bramble, and thanking Professor Blackman, as well as the Provost and the Provost's office, and everyone who will have facilitated
participated in enabling the conversation we're about to have this evening to actually happen. And whether you're in the audience or online, I'm hoping that the conversation will enable you to have at least an appreciation of some of the dynamics regarding the matters about which we're about to speak. I always like to come back to Medgar Evers. Some of you may know I have lots of relationships in and around Medgar Evers, going back, way back. And Ken, you may not know that my second book was launched here in 1993. The word that we used was not as auspicious as this, but thanks to George Irish, the late George Irish, Caribbean Research Center has been enabling conversations about scholarly enterprises to be undertaken. So I appreciate it. Now, I'm going to have a few moments of the conversation revolving around, as Dr. Irish Bamble mentioned, a book that I was recently enabled in writing. And very often people ask the question, well, what is the origin of the book that you've written? Or what's the origin of the story you're telling? You'll see on the left side of the screen something that gives an idea of what the origin, what the genesis of the book was. The book came out of a lecture I delivered in 2011 at Florida International University. How many of you know of the name Eric Williams? Dr. Bramble has $100 he's going to give to anyone who can tell us about this work. Did you say Florida International University? Yes.
I just graduated from there.
It's a small world. Small world. I have been at Florida International University for more than a decade. And I was at York, and they invited me back to deliver one of the lectures in a series honoring Eric Williams. Eric's daughter, Erica, is a good friend, and Erica said, Ivelaw, I need you to deliver this lecture. 2011 was the centennial year of Eric's birth. And the lecture was so well received, everyone kept saying, you've got to publish this lecture. And it was fits and starts. I started in 2011, didn't get back to it until a long time. Then I moved around the country. My wife keeps saying, you got to stop moving around, stop moving around. So when I finally retired, I took a year as a distinguished visiting scholar at the University of Delaware and finished that book in 2020. I was pleasantly surprised that even though the publishing contract specified that the book manuscript should be turned in 2013, the publishers allowed me to turn it in 2020, years after. And so the journey came to an end in 2020. And you know, it takes a while for scholarly books to go through the process of internal review and external review. And so I'm delighted to be able to bring that part of the journey to an end with the actual publication of the book. Don't know if you know the picture of the gentleman here, but there's a guy called Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell was one of those Renaissance men of the 19th century who was both a philosopher and a mathematician. And over the decades, I've used a recommendation from Bertrand Russell for conversations like this. Bertrand Russell once said, sometimes it's helpful to hang a question mark on things. And so what I thought I might do is hang a couple of question marks about this study, enabling us to have the conversation about the security challenges of the Caribbean. So if you would indulge me, I'd like to recommend that we hang 3 question marks this evening. It's always important to have an idea of what a study, what a book is all about. So I think it's good for us to ask the question, what are the aims of this book, this study? And how is the book, the study constructed? What is its architecture? But I think it's also important to ask the question, what is the central argument? What's the central thesis of the book? And what are some of the main propositions, arguments in the study? But it's also important to say a little bit about, beyond the propositions, what are the findings? What are the key findings of the book? Of course, we wouldn't have time to go in depth to each of those, but I think it's important to have a sense about these three question marks. So what might we say about the aims and the architecture of the book? There are 6 aims, and I allow you to peruse them on your own. But any scholarly enterprise needs to have some notion of what the conceptual framework of the book is all about. So one of the aims is to outline, to discuss the relevant conceptual parameters in relation to vulnerability, in relation to security. And it is important in the context of what the aims of the study are all about, that I focus a little bit about what I call these problems without passports: the problem of drugs, problem of crime, problem of terrorism, problem of cyber threat. And you'll see that the 6th aim is a simple but I think important question that I want to probe. The question is actually the question that I posed in that 2011 Eric Williams lecture. How secure is carrying security, and how sovereign is carrying sovereignty? We say we're secure. How secure are we? We say we're sovereign. How sovereign are we? So these are the 6 aims of the study that, in my view, are worthy of being pursued, and I attempted to make that pursuit. When you buy the book, and not only buy it, but read it, you use that $100 from Professor Bramble, another one $100 from Provost. She has a bunch of $100 bills in her pocket there. Professor Blackman has some $100 bills as well. You'll find that the book is fairly sizable, a little over 300 pages. You'll find it is organized into 4 sections. You'll find that as I am given to doing, I believe in quantitative as well as qualitative data. And so I represent some of the issues, some of the challenges, some of what my findings have been, what my findings are in lots of graphs and charts and sidebars. There is a wealth. As a matter of fact, one review of the book said, the problem with this book, it has so much data. That was a nice critique together. But I also take the opportunity to include in the book an appendix. What's your name?
Marsha.
Marsha's asking, why this appendix? The appendix I include in the book is the treaty in relation to extradition signed by the United States and Jamaica in 1983. That extradition treaty is the fulcrum around which what later became known as the Dulles Affair revolved. When the United States tried to extradite Christopher Dulles Cope from Jamaica to the United States to face a slew of trafficking and gun running and murder charges, they used that treaty. But the treaty also became a model of United States treaties with other countries. And you'll see that represented, in the context of how the American system works, treaties have got to be ratified by the United States Senate. And the president at the time would send a message to the Senate with the treaty. And the message from President Reagan at the time explained the importance of the treaty, not only in regard to Jamaica, but this is a model that the United States Department of State would be using in relation to extradition with countries around the world. So that treaty, I thought, would be useful to include it in its entirety. So anyone interested in what is the legal basis for the extradition between United States and Jamaica? And what is it that created such a stir in 2009, 2010, leading to that terrible episode of American-Jamaican relations, terrible experience of Jamaica's security and sovereignty? I also think it's important in works like this, not only to do regional analysis, but to include some case studies. So there's a case study in the Dulles affair. There's a case study on the episode in Trinidad and Tobago in 2011, where the crime and the drugs created such a ruckus in Trinidad, they had to declare a state of emergency for several months. There's a case study on Trinidad and Tobago. But there's also a case study in regards to Suriname. You may not know that Suriname in 2010 elected as its president a gentleman who had been the perpetrator of a coup way back in the 70s, and who had at the time the dubious distinction of being the only head of state convicted of drug trafficking. And there was a worry in many parts of the hemisphere that Desi Balthazar, the gentleman, would make Suriname into a narco state. There's a case study on the Suriname experience. And so, if you ask the question, what is the architecture of the book? This slide gives you an opportunity to understand what the architecture is about. And we can, when we have the conversation part, we can probe a little bit more on those issues. So let's move to the second question. What is the central thesis of this book? Well, we know that the book examines drugs, crime, terrorism, and cyber threats as problems without passports. And problems without passports is a term that not I didn't coin. It's a term coined by Kofi Annan, former Secretary of the United Nations, who was talking about the realities that the global community is experiencing some issues that didn't ask permission to come to your country. They didn't take account of who is the political or legal representative or leaders of the country. They didn't need any passport to be part of your headache in your country. But in the context of the problems without passports, here in the second bullet, you'll see what the thesis of my study is all about. I argue that the threats posed by the drugs and the crime of the other PWPs have been exacerbating the vulnerability of Caribbean countries, pushing their states of security into turbulent seas, presenting circumstances of challenged sovereignty. Now, Marsha, being the outstanding scholar she is, wants to know what the devil is this challenged sovereignty all about. And so, remembering the importance of what Voltaire said way back when, remember who Voltaire was? That's French philosopher, French writer who always said, if you're going to talk with me, you've got to tell me what you mean. Define your terms. So I define my term. For me, challenged sovereignty as a concept relates to a condition where the state's vulnerability is exacerbated by internal and external developments. Developments that compromise the ability of the supreme authority of the state to promulgate, to execute domestic and foreign policy in its own deliberate judgment and its own terms. And if you're mindful of, if you're partisan to formulas, some of us like to quantify things, I have a formula there for you. CS is a sigma of C1 and C2 and C3. And so Marsha wants to know what is this C1 and C2 and C3. And I said to her, maybe you buy the book, you read about it. Mm-hmm. But I think the most important question mark is the third one. What are some of the main findings? What are we talking about as the outcome of this study insofar as the results, the findings of those? Well, understandably, in these few minutes, I cannot represent all the main findings, but I think it's important to share a couple of them with you. I have found that the challenges about which we are studying, these problems are without passports, are not merely challenges within some Caribbean countries. They are challenges of the entire Caribbean. Whether it's a Montserrat or a Jamaica or a Dominican Republic or a Statia or a Saba or a Puerto Rico, these problems without passports are region-wide. Now, it's also true that whereas they're all region-wide, their intensity is not manifested in the same way in every place. Drug trafficking doesn't happen the same way in every part of the Caribbean. The cybercrime does not happen in the same way and the same intensity. But it is also true that cyber challenges resonate with lesser threat intensity because of the underreporting of cyber criminality in many parts of the region. It's important to recognize that we're talking about issues that are region-wide in scope, not simply episodic insofar as they're concerned. But hear this, there are a couple of other important points to make in regard to the main findings. One of them is the fact that the leaders of the region and the leaders of countries of interest and importance to the region accept these problems without passports as their headaches. They have declared these problems without passports as part of their clear and present danger. But it is also a main finding of the study that because of the transnationality, because of the multidimensionality, because of the capacity limitations of Caribbean countries have had to rely on non-Caribbean countries to deal with the drugs, to deal with the crime, to deal with the cyber threats. By themselves, Caribbean countries cannot deal with these issues, partly because of incapacity, partly because of the capacity of some of the bad guys being greater than some Caribbean countries. I delivered a module early this morning, I had to get up quite early because of the time difference, for the European Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I was sharing with them insofar making a point regarding the capacity differentiation. I did a book in 1997 called Drugs and Security in the Caribbean. Part of that research, I spent a couple of nights aboard a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. Drove my wife crazy. The 3 nights I was there observing drug trafficking. And I remember asking the captain the first night that I took the watch with them. Name is Zukunft. His name is in the book. I said, Captain, tell me, what is some of the greatest pleasure you get from fighting the bad guy? He said, Professor, there's none. Because some of the bad guys have faster boats than we do. This was a 240-foot medium endurance cut of the U.S. Coast Guard. 270 knots maximum speed. The Coast Guard could not keep up with the go-fast boats. Now, if the U.S. Coast Guard cannot keep up, could you imagine a small Caribbean jurisdiction, like Jamaica, Curacao, being able to keep up? So sometimes it's not only an issue of the capacity limitations of the states, it's the capacity wealth on the part of the bad guys. Give you another example. This occurred when I was at Florida International, Dominican Republic. Guy arrested for cocaine trafficking. Hired some of the smartest lawyers from Miami. The lawyers knew of the incapacity of the state, knew of what the requirements for conviction are. And one of the requirements to be convicted for illegal trafficking of a substance is that you've got to have a test that shows that the substance is the substance. The lawyers knew that a chemical lab to test the substances wasn't working, the machines were broken. So guess what the lawyers did? They went to court and they said, Your Honor, we were moving stuff, but it was not cocaine. The stuff that they arrested was detergent. The judge said, well, where is the certificate of test to show that this thing is cocaine? Mira, señor, case was dismissed simply because the smart lawyers that the bad guys were able to hire, knowing the limitations of the state, used that very limitation to get over the state. Now, if you're doing a study in the 2020, 2021, 2022, 23 on issues of sovereignty and security in the Caribbean, or any part of the world, you cannot ignore the issue of the pandemic. Now, I may ask how the pandemic factors into it. Well, the pandemic created some circumstances that allowed the bad guys to prey. When we had to do, and many of us, teleworking, telemedicine, and distance learning, we were more wedded to our what? Computers. The vulnerability factor went up. So there were lots of scams. There were lots of, not only scams of older folks, but scam of young folks, commandeering equipment, giving you false information. My son and I went to see a powerful movie a couple of weeks ago. The Beekeeper. Have you seen The Beekeeper? Go see that movie. Revolves around scamming. Scamming of old woman who worked her decades off as a teacher for money, but she's not only a teacher, she was working in a nonprofit world, helping young people. They robbed that woman, scammed her, using her own computer. Led to a certain, she committed suicide. So when you read the book, you'll find that the circumstances of the security in relation to cybercrime was enabled, enhanced, permitted by the circumstances that revolved around what happened during that pandemic. I don't know if we can get this thing to play.
Or was it a video?
Yes, it's a video. But how many of you know of Peter Tosh's Legalize It? It was an anthem about marijuana. The chapter that deals with drugs, I used Peter Tosh's, some of the lyrics of that song as part of the epigraph to make several points. Not to worry. Not to worry. Okay? Not to worry.
Yeah, my apologies, I should have checked before.
And part of what Peter Tosh advocated along with others, Bob Marley and many people across the Caribbean, United States and Europe, was for a different view of drugs, of marijuana, certain kinds of drugs. A different view because in many parts of the Caribbean, marijuana had a religious component to it, had a cultural connectivity to the region. The same way in which certain substances in the South American part of the continent had a connectivity to religion and culture and geography. The coca leaf, for example, that is a base for cocaine, long before cocaine was invented, the coca leaf was being used for religious purposes and was being used because it enabled citizens in part of the Andes to cope with the heights. I myself, my first visit to Bolivia, to La Paz, which is a city 12,000 feet above sea level, I could not exist, couldn't cope. They brought me coca tea. Knocked me out, slept for like 5-6 hours, and for the next couple of days, I can survive. Coca tea has good positive effect in relation to dealing with the geography, the ice. And so what Bob Marley and others were saying is that it's about time that Caribbean jurisdictions take a different view of marijuana. They're not advocating cocaine, not advocating heroin, not advocating ecstasy. And what I show in the book is that over the passage of time, some of the very things that were advocated by Peter Tosh and others, Bob Marley and others, came to pass and are now coming to pass in the Caribbean. But let me share with you a reminder of what this is and is not. This is a graphic representation of drug trafficking. But unless you are familiar with the realities of the region, you may get the impression that drug trafficking is the only aspect of the drugs phenomenon that is a present danger to the region. The problem of drugs is not simply about trafficking. It's about production of certain illegal substances. It's about money laundering. It's about consumption of certain substances. The friend from FIU, the graduate at FIU, what's his name?
Del?
Del. $100 from Professor Blackman's money. Do you know where the crack epidemic originated? Going once, going to, you gotta keep $100, but
That's good.
the crack epidemic originated in the part of the Caribbean called the Bahamas. And in the book, I give you examples of the interface between production and consumption, and between consumption and certain economic business performances. I cite the study, the reports in Jamaica of prostitutes using ecstasy to give them greater stamina to do their job for hours without taking a break. So it's not simply a matter of drugs passing through the Caribbean. The realities that our societies have had to contend with: consumption of illegal substances, trafficking of illegal substances, money laundering of illegal substances, proceeds. But here is what some of the realities contemporarily, in light of the changes since what Peter Tosh advocated legalizing. 47 different states in the United States, along with the District of Columbia, have legalized marijuana for medicinal and recreational purposes. But in spite of that, there is still a federal ban against trafficking. So the counter-narcotics battle between the United States and the Caribbean still happens. But hear this. You know that legalization in the United States has led to a reverse trafficking between the United States and Caribbean countries. Most of the time, the long history of trafficking is that the drugs have come from South America to the Caribbean, or from the Caribbean to the United States or elsewhere. Now, people have been finding trafficking of United States marijuana to the Caribbean. I give the example of a woman right from Brooklyn who was arrested in Jamaica. Arrested for all the marijuana she had. You know what? She wanted to show some of her Jamaican friends that American ganja is better than Jamaican ganja. The judge said, the magistrate said, yes, but you know that was a certificate to traffic. Harsh realities of what we're dealing with. It is a wonderful reality adaptation to see that many Caribbean countries have been taking a different view. The view advocated by Peter Tosh and others in the 1970s, to redefine the relationship between a society and certain illegal substances, to decriminalize marijuana for certain substances, to even start shipping marijuana abroad. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is one of the first countries in the Eastern Caribbean to start shipping marijuana to Germany for research. There was a big uproar last year in Jamaica when the Jamaican companies involved were importing marijuana from Canada for research. Jamaicans say, how dare you? We ganja please. We import ganja for research. So there are changing dynamics, and I take the opportunity in the book to go country by country to show what some of those changes have been. Legalizing, decriminalizing, making it now possible for a young man, 15, 20 years, not to be incarcerated for 1 or 2 spiffs. And I provide the data where the Attorney General of Trinidad shows what the cost of Trinidad has been by arresting and imprisoning all these young people. It costs more to keep them in prison than the cost of the product about which they have been, for which they have been arrested. Crime in the region is part of this clear and present danger portrait. Now, when we think of criminality, we think of a variety of different crimes. But we tend, for good reason, to focus on the significance of the homicides. Because the homicides present a finality that is not there with something, say, like possession of a certain quantity of marijuana, or even a financial crime. And part of the challenge to many Caribbean countries and Central American and Latin American countries is the profusion of homicides. Figure 4.1 in the book gives you a portrait for the year 2021. Jamaica, more per capita crime than even Venezuela. And you may think that small countries in the region, like Guyana, would not be up in that list, but they're there. Trinidad and Tobago. There were calls in Trinidad and Tobago last year for more states of emergency, as Jamaica has been having states of emergency to curb and to cope with the homicides. This is a snapshot for 2023 homicides in the Caribbean. Look at this. Small St. Kitts and Nevis, more per capita crime than Jamaica. Think about a small jurisdiction, 160,000 people, what it means when you have so many murders. And Provost, these murders these days are not by and large by cutlass and machetes. They're by what? Guns. Guns. I share with you 2 sentences from what the Jamaican Prime Minister Holness said. Every Jamaican would have recognized that the nature and frequency of the violence have evolved to a level of barbarity and a level of savagery. It is almost a competition for cruelty. The worst of the worst. It appears designed and properly calculated to drive fear into the citizenry of the country and panicking communities. And I identify a number of countries where the savagery, the barbarity is unbelievable. Give a couple of examples. Who would have thought that in small, pristine St. Lucia, they would try to rub out the magistrate? She's taking her daughter, 8-year-old daughter, to school in the morning. They try to kill her. Why? She's sending the drug guys to prison. Who would have thought it in Trinidad and Tobago, the prosecutor, Dana, leave a party one night, ambushed by 3 SUVs, kill her. Jamaica, how many of you know about Montego Bay? Some of you are from Montego Bay. It was outstanding and worrisome to read, and this is related to the pandemic. in Jamaica 2021, this Christian sect, where the guy who is in charge of the sect, who said he's a bishop of the nations, does not believe in vaccination, called a meeting of his church, tell them that everyone who is vaccinated is unpure, and the unpure will not be going in the ark that is going to be taking saved people. But more than this, he authorized members of the church to kill anyone who is vaccinated. In the church, people started cutting each other's throats. You would not think of something like this, but these are you may not have read about it, heard about it. One of the parishioners decided to call the cops. They had already killed 4 people in the church. He himself suffered an accident later on, going from Obey to Kingston. Accident occurred along the way. See, he was never brought to justice. So the barbarity and the savagery about which Prime Minister Holness is talking is not only a reflection of what is happening in Jamaica. It is unfortunately the reality of many parts of the Caribbean in the small jurisdictions that you would not think. But part of the challenge has to do with the ripple effect of the criminality on the prisons. There is a distinguished Russian writer called Fyodor Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky said something which I've used in this book to make the point about the prison conundrum. He said, the degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. In other words, if you want to know what a society thinks of itself as a civilization, as a people, look and see how it treats its prisoners. And I argue that if you look into many Caribbean prisons, you would have a great questioning of yourself about the civilization of certain jurisdictions. And you can glean the drama of the prison by looking at the overcrowding. These are the overcrowding data. 109% St. Lucia. Dominican Republic, 183%. Haiti, 454%. In other words, the prisons are overcrowded by 3 or 4 times more the number of people for which it was built. Remember I told you I spent a couple of nights aboard the U.S. Coast Guard observing drug trafficking? But I had a foolish notion that I want to observe prison reality. So I went to Trinidad and Tobago. Any of you been to Trinidad and Tobago prison? Don't put your hand up, just bow. I see who's bowing. I intended to observe for a day. Ken, I couldn't spend 4 hours in that prison. The Trinidad and Tobago Central Prison was built in the year 1812 by the British. They built it at the time when the United States and Britain was having a war, the War of 1812. The British built that to house American rebels in Trinidad. The day I was in that prison, there were over 800 people, prisoners. Think of what happens in a prison built for 250 when there are 800 plus. And think of the civilization, what it means, not only for the prisoners, but for the prison officers who've got to manage the filth, the debauchery of the prisons that are so severely overcrowded. But part of my worry about the overcrowded prison and the reality of prisons has to do in part with who are in prison and what that prison representation means for the society. Invariably, the prisoners, particularly for drugs and gun infractions, are people between ages 18 and 35. The most productive years of any society's citizens' lives. So it means that significant portion of the society's productive capacity is not benefiting the society. They're behind bars. And invariably, they are not only behind bars, they become recidivists. Once they get in prison, they go right back and do the criminality. They get back into prison. Because in some respects, and it happens in the United States as well, the prison provides a certain comfort level, even if it's overcrowded. They can get something to eat. They don't have to deal with finding a place to rest their head. There's a certain protection provided by the prison which is not there when they're outside. So think of what that means for a society where so many of its people are a revolving door, not able to contribute meaningfully. And the contributions they may make are unhelpful to the society. But when we lived in Florida, I was at FIU, I regularly appeared on a program, a Jamaican radio program called The Breakfast Club. Michael Manley's third wife, Beverly Anderson, was a co-host of The Breakfast Club. And I remember one day Beverly called me in a panic. She said, Ivelaw, you need to come on tomorrow and help me discuss this business of women, Jamaican women in British prisons. Beverly had just had a reality check when the then Jamaican High Commissioner to London learned that the number of Jamaican women who were in prisons, in British prisons, because of drugs, sometimes not knowingly trafficking. You know, somebody's going to Brayson, you tell them, take a little package for me. Somebody went to Kingston, said, take a little package for me. That little package may be something that should not be moved, shouldn't be taken by you. So there are a number of women who were in British prisons for knowingly trafficking and sometimes foolishly, naively being incarcerated for trafficking. And so we had a wonderful reality check conversation at Breakfast Club that morning about not only general United Jamaican citizens, but women now in prison, therefore, the capacity to help the family back home. In many of those cases, there were single-headed households. So the kids now are abandoned, grandmas to take care of them, the villagers to take care of them. Think of the ripple effect on a society where so many of its citizens are in prison. So part of the challenge has to do with the conundrum regarding prisons. Anyone from Trinidad or Trinidad descent? Well, the name Jamaat al-Muslimin may be recalled even if you're not Trinidadian. Jamaat al-Muslimin was the religious sect that perpetrated a coup attempt, almost maintained power in Trinidad. But if you fast forward from 1990, when that coup attempt happened, and as I was telling the folks this morning in that country in Europe foreign ministry I was dealing with, you know where the weapons for that episode were purchased? Purchased right in Florida at gun shows, Second Amendment rights. In Trinidad, some of the religious sects have had such a strong attachment to Islam and to the Middle East that a number of Trinidadians were being recruited to go and fight with ISIS. The data is there. There's still some legal challenges right now in Trinidad because many of them went there now, they realized that all the promises they were told when they're going to go there, and so they want to come back to Trinidad. Now they're suing the government to rescue them. There is a reality of terrorism in the Caribbean, central to which Trinidad has been for a number of years. But I make the point in the book that even before 9/11, terrorism had manifested itself in the Caribbean. We didn't have the conversations about it as terrorism. But what do you think? I must have deleted this slide. I wanted to say, in regards to Trinidad and Tobago being important, but they were before 9/11 episodes in the Caribbean about terrorism. An incident of terrorist character off Barbados. It's referred to as the Cubana Air disaster. Cubana Air disaster was really a Cubana terrorism incident. Anybody can say a little bit about a Cubana disaster? Well, here it was some Cuban terrorists using Cuban plane filled with Guyanese, Cubans, and North Koreans, destroyed the plane off Barbados. That was actually long before 9/11. It was the first incident in the Americas where an aircraft was used to perpetrate terrorism. But it was not called terrorism, there was a disaster. Terrorism. So I have a conversation, a very extensive conversation about, in the chapter, terrorism and cybercrime. And you ask yourself the question, where in the Caribbean is perhaps the epicenter of cybercriminality? Don't want to take the provost money anymore. Friend over there called Philip, he has $100 too. Philip will give you $100 if you can tell me which or suggest what Caribbean country is the epicenter of cybercriminality. I'll save you $100. Puerto Rico. And they use the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. Certain restrictions don't exist. And not only is cybercriminality a significant challenge in the Caribbean, it is a growing challenge worldwide. And economic calculations about what it costs are represented in this chart. But you'll see that part of my concern in the book, which is a portrait of a terrible reality we're facing in the Caribbean. Part of my concern is that we don't become fatalistic and give up. That we don't surrender to the bad guys. And as I've done with other things I've written, I sometimes look to take comfort in what poetry says or represents or recommends. And I went back to a Jamaican poet called Claude McKay. Claude McKay was one of the people who was part of the Harlem Renaissance, one of the leaders of the Harlem Renaissance. This poem was written in 1919. And the more I reread Claude McKay's poem, where he was talking about not cybercrime or terrorism or sovereignty, he was talking about the plight of blacks, the destitution, the incivility, the threat to survival of black folk. He was also saying you've got to have hope. We can't give up. And I thought, let me end the book by having a reminder of the importance of hope, the importance of resistance, the importance of resilience. And so, if we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us die nobly, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us through death, though dead. All kinsmen, says McKay, we must meet the common foe. Common foe we must meet, cybercrime, terrorism, drugs. Though far outnumbers, let us show us brave. And for the 1,000 blows, deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men we face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. We've got to fight back. We can't be fatalistic and say give up. We can't do anything about a crime. You're overwhelmed. And that is a clear and present danger in many parts of the region. They're so overwhelmed, it's just practicing the signs of mudding through. So I thought,
Unveiling a literary masterpiece, Challenged Sovereignty by Dr. Ivelaw Lloyd Griffith. This book demonstrates how drugs, crime, terrorism, and cyber threats converge, shaping the destiny of the Caribbean. 12 years in the making, this groundbreaking study unravels the complex tapestry of challenges facing the Caribbean, including regional analysis and compelling case studies. Grab your copy of Challenged Sovereignty by Dr. Ivelaw Lloyd Griffith with an exclusive 30% discount at the University of Illinois Press or available on Amazon.com.
you call this a shameless plug. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Griffith, as always. You did not disappoint, and that was certainly an interesting and enlightening overview of the security threats that we face throughout the region. And if there's one thing that we've become very clear about recently is that those threats are for those of us here in the United States, that this is not an isolated thing that we can ignore. In fact, one of the consequences of these threats is knocking at our very door on a daily basis as people flee those conditions. All right, we're going to transition into the second phase of this conversation, a little bit more dialogue. So I'm going to invite Dr. Blackman to join me on stage, and we're going to open up, we're going to have a dialogue here, a roundtable dialogue, about some of the issues that you've raised. And of course, we're going to welcome questions from the audience or comments from the audience, both the in-person, in-house audience and those online. All right. Anyway, just to facilitate, I know there's limited space over there. If it's okay with you, gentlemen, I'll speak from here. Is that fine?
Sure.
All right.
So,
Fair enough.
so I'll take this one then.
All right. Fair enough.
Stretch out.
Let me get you the blow mics. Make sure everyone can hear you. And they should be strong enough that you don't need to. So I'm going to pose the first question to you, Dr. Griffith, and it's a very simple one. What do you think is the greatest security threat to the region? So you've mentioned quite a few, and they're all quite troubling, as you put it. But if you had to identify a single greatest threat to security, let's start with security. We'll talk about sovereignty afterwards. What would it be?
Well, it's hard to identify a single standalone threat, partially because of the interrelationships among them. And interrelationships, even if you were to only use 2 or 3 of the 4 problems of a task force. Give you an example. September 2022, there were counter-narcotics, counter-crime, counter-trafficking operation in the Caribbean. It was run by Interpol and CARICOM Impacts. Just in 3 weeks, they confiscated thousands of kilos of cocaine, marijuana, made hundreds of arrests, confiscated several thousand ammunition, several thousand guns, submachine guns. And that was just in the Caribbean. You may ask the question, well, what does that bust, that operation represent? It represents drug trafficking. It represents crime. It represents capacity limitation on the part of states. it represents the
Territorial
necessity
threats.
for collaboration among them. So when you look at how the problems about passports have been manifesting themselves, it's difficult to say as a region one stands out. Now, when you ask the question in particular jurisdictions, what may stand out, you have a better appreciation. If you go, for example, to Trinidad and Tobago, they will tell you what? Crime. Not because crime is not connected to the drugs, but crime is a manifestation that is in the face of the people. It's a manifestation that is impacting not only the law enforcement and the military, but affecting the businesses. So I am always hard pressed to pick one because of the connectivity is between them among them.
Fair enough. So one of the underlying questions, I suppose, is what role does the United States play in all of this? So you mentioned, for example, threats to sovereignty posed by the United States, whether it is in their pursuit of drug traffickers. We had incidents in Trinidad where there was controversy about whether or not they should be able to enter into territorial waters. You mentioned, of course, the trafficking of guns from the United States, which exacerbates all of the crime issues throughout the region. And I guess I'm asking the general question. So, like how much, because at the same time, we have to consider that as you said, the national capacity of Caribbean countries to actually deal with this problem creates an issue of also, of dependency. So there's a crisis that they need support from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from others. But at the same time, U.S. foreign policy or U.S. policy in general has helped to create these crises. So I'm asking the question in general, but I also want you to speak to, there was a lot of discussion in the 90s and the early 2000s about the deportee experience and what that did to the rise in crime throughout the region. And you I'm making my question longer than your response. I'm thinking of places that you also highlighted St. Lucia, and I love the way that you introduced it. It's a pristine place that now is riddled with gang violence, and it seems a culture that has been transplanted from the United States into the region. I'd just love to hear your thoughts about how U.S. foreign policy, U.S. policy in general, and what the United States has contributed to this crisis in their backyard, as they would, some would like to say.
Chapter 8 of the book responds to the question which I outlined in the aims. How secure is security, how sovereign is sovereign. And I think what I call the inartful response of not very secure, not very sovereign. And part of that dilemma is connected to the United States. Part of that dilemma of not being secure, not being sovereign, is connected to the nature of the threats. Let me give a couple of examples. The United States is helpful, but unhelpful. Let me take the unhelpful for a start.
Sure.
I mentioned Jamaat al-Muslimin purchase of weapons for that coup. In the context of an American system where everything is not at a federal level, states have rights, and some states design their political realities to say, we want to have access to weapons uninhibited. It is not helpful in a jurisdiction, whether it's Trinidad or Jamaica, where someone can readily, easily purchase weapons, readily, easily ship them to the Caribbean, prosecute crimes. But there's another part to that equation. Partly because the United States recognizes the transnationality issue, the United States is being helpful in the gun tracing. The United States is not standing in the way anymore in regards to Mexico's pursuit of the gun manufacturers
And their contribution.
and their contribution. And 14 Caribbean countries have signed on as amicus curiae in that lawsuit. The United States was at first opposing it, but then they said, look, the reality is Caribbean countries have a point, Mexico has a point. Part of the reality that you refer to in regard to shipwright is more of an issue of controversy back in the 1990s, when Jamaica and Barbados said we're not going to do any shipwrighting unless there's reciprocity. You can't want to come and ride unimpeded in my jurisdiction, but don't want to have me, my folks, come into American waters. And that was a standoff for months. Trinidad signed the agreement, Barbados and Jamaica said no. So you'll find the circumstances of cooperation and collaboration, but by virtue of how the American political system works. Yes, the states have the right to make legal for recreational and medicinal purposes, but the federal government said no. So you find both helpful and hurtful. The deportees issue continues. And I remember I used to get a lot of nasty looks sometimes when I speak in certain Caribbean countries to say, it is not only the United States who's deporting people back to the Caribbean.
Yep, England.
It's not only England, it's Caribbean countries that are deporting each other's citizens. Almost every week, Cayman Islands send back some Jamaican. Almost every week, Suriname send back some Guyanese. Back in the day, almost every day, Trinidad are going back to Guyana. They hate Guyanese. What do they call that Guyana? So the reality of the deportee is dramatic with the United States sending back. There was a case, very notorious case in Canada. They chartered a plane and just dumped the Guyanese on the airport and they took off. They apologized afterwards, but guess what? They didn't take them back. It is a contentious issue largely because, and here again, what sovereignty means and what the democratic landscape is. Yes, a Jamaican or Guyanese or Trinidadian or American may have committed some crime in America. But he didn't commit a crime in Jamaica where you're sending him back to. So the Jamaican authorities now can't just arrest him within the context of their domestic jurisdiction. You've got to wait until something happens. So it poses a dilemma. To what extent is there the capacity now, Jamaica passed a law in 1994, to try to manage that? Not very many jurisdictions have been doing a good enough job, but the issue of deportation is still a clear and present challenge in many Caribbean countries. You might remember the name Bill Clinton.
He's in Guyana today.
He was in Guyana today. Bill Clinton became notorious in the 1990s. He was the first American president who went to Central America May 9th and then went to Barbados May 10th. The top of the agenda for both summits, deportation. But guess what came out of that conversation? Nothing. Because in the domestic political environment, as is the case with the British environment, the local folks are saying, we've got to do something about these foreigners who are committing crimes. Let's send them back. So Bill Clinton sympathized, but he was constrained. They tried to find grant programs to help deportees. It is still a challenge, and it is one of the harsh realities of sovereignty. If you are a sovereign nation, a citizen of your country, who comes back to you, you're obligated to take him back. Now, can you manage what he does or she does there? Not necessarily, but it's a responsibility of the nation, of the sovereign nation. So, short answer, America both helpful and hurtful. Partly because of intent, partly because of domestic jurisdictional issues, policy on both sides.
Yeah.
Dr. Batman?
No, so one question that I wanted to I wanted to raise with Professor Griffith. So bringing things to the current day, Haiti. How do you see Haiti as an example of, what you've been, these problems with them? This is where the state goes when the actors, internal and external, kind of consume the state in some very real way. And you mentioned St. Lucia, a small place like St. Lucia, and I had this sort of vision on the very dark negative side that we could see many of our. You mentioned St. Kitts, and I noted St. Kitts and high rates of homicide, and it struck me that one thing that we should be worried about is the entire Caribbean going in the direction. And what are your thoughts on how likely something like that can?
Good question, observation. In the book, I described Haiti as being the most dramatic manifestation of challenged sovereignty. And to understand the manifestation of challenged sovereignty in Haiti requires you to go beyond the problems of our passports. Even before the ravages of the drugs, crime, there have not been many terrorist incidents in Haiti. Even before the cybercrime. Haiti's very birth was a manifestation of sovereignty not being sovereign. Because once it was born in 1804, it had an albatross around its neck that did not allow it to do the things for the society. We know that Haiti had to borrow money from the very French government, French banks, to pay back France. And so money to invest in education and roads and civil society. So it's a manifestation of challenged sovereignty on steroids. But a challenged sovereignty predated these problems with our passports. Thankfully, in my view, Terence, other Caribbean countries are not in that extreme state where the multiplicity of challenges, even predating the drugs, crime, so burden the society. But part of the challenge, I remember when I was at FI, I was part of a group, 12 or 14 of us, academics, people from State Department, Southern Command, with a monthly focus group dealing with security issues in the Caribbean. I remember the chairman, the commander of the Southern Command once had a conversation about Haiti. This was in the 1990s. He had a question for all of us. Haiti was then planning to hold legislative elections. And his question was, ladies and gentlemen, what should I be thinking of? What should the Defense Department be thinking of in preparation for the election? When it came to me, I said, General, I want to put another question on the table. What should Southern Command, State Department, and the US government be doing, preparing to do for after the elections? Whether in the United States or Caribbean countries, Latin America, democracy has a falsity to it. There's this assumption that people who are elected know how to lead. People who are elected know how to govern. And it's a falsity. You know that every time there's a city council election, new city councilors go to Baruch College for a seminar on how to be a council member. Every time there are congressional elections, Harvard, JFK School hosts, helping people to understand what are the pros and cons, what are the limits of what you can do. So I said to the general, the United States needs to be able to help Haiti to understand how to govern the society after the elections. And I said, the first thing you need to do is to enable people to understand the Constitution. The Constitution of Haiti was for a long time just in French. Most citizens of Haiti do not read French. The elites read French, but the average person is Creole. So put the Constitution in Creole, make it accessible. I said, hold some seminars to enable the legislators to know that you can't bring all your cousins into the ministry of whatever just because they're your family. So I think part of the reality of Haiti has been much more to do with things other than the criminality that is painted. And thankfully, in my view, I don't see any other Caribbean country having the albatrosses over time, the way in which Haiti has had this albatross over time. You know, and this is my final point of this. And I don't know whether they teach this in American history courses. The growth of the United States is intimately connected to the existence of Haiti. The French king so badly wanted money to beat the Haitians, he sold a whole part of what was French territory in Louisiana for next to nothing. But the Haitians still won. But then the world punished them by saying, you gotta pay us back. Gunships. Haiti is a case of challenged sovereignty on steroids. And thankfully, other Caribbean countries are not clear there. I was telling a friend in Canada, and this is not going to make my wife very happy. I'm thinking of doing a challenge sovereignty take 2, focusing on Haiti and CARICOM.
I was about to ask you about it.
Because I think the episode of Haiti's crisis is a manifestation of how CARICOM as an institution is challenged in its sovereignty.
Yes. So, I don't
50 nations cannot come together and you don't have the capacity to airlift. You don't have the capacity to.
Yeah.
So the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
But how willing is the spirit? So it's funny that you said that, because that was going to be my follow-up question to Dr. Blackman. Is CARICOM, so we accept that CARICOM has limitations, right? And that CARICOM, for example, that now that Haiti has plunged into crisis, that CARICOM cannot lead. So it's why we are, even on the international scene, seeking Africans and African countries to lead any initiative. But and it goes back to your comments about deportation. But at the same time, CARICOM nations, who are the true neighbors of Haiti, and Haiti is clearly in crisis, we do have to, or it seems to me we have to ask, what really is their commitment over time, right? To helping lift Haiti out of its condition, or to ease some degree of not just the suffering of Haiti as a nation, but of the Haitian people. And I'm thinking of a range of things, including, how long it took us to even embrace Haiti, but also refugees historically. So, what are your genuine thoughts on CARICOM's commitment to its true neighbor? And you said that the United States owes much to Haiti. It's not just the United States that owes much to Haiti. Every one of those Caribbean nations owes much to Haiti for helping to break the back of the institution of slavery and to put some of the first real kinks in the armor of colonialism. So I'll leave it there and toss that
I'll let Terrence go first.
All right, go ahead.
No, I was going to go in a completely different direction.
All right, so let me go.
So I'll
before
let
you
you,
go.
I'll let you go, yes. And I know that there was some other elements you wanted to add to that direction.
A couple of years ago, I was in Ghana. And at a dinner, the Ghanaian colleagues that I was speaking with were pleasantly surprised to learn that in Guyana, we celebrated Ghana Day. It still happens. When I was a kid growing up in Guyana, I loved that Ghana Day holiday. You gotta go to school, you gotta go to parade, you gotta put on your African garb. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana said something which resonates still with the reality of decolonized countries. He said the greatest challenge of decolonization is the decolonization of the mind. In Haiti, we're still dealing with that. In the Caribbean, we're still dealing with that. And the manifestation of an element of that is the fact that the decolonization, branding, and imaging of us against our own is such that many Caribbean citizens don't like Haitians because we have been conditioned to think that they're bad people, that their voodoo is bad. What's the difference between voodoo and Christianity? Different symbols, different faith base, but we've been led to believe that these Haitians are doing voodoo, evil stuff. It's part of the decolonization. I remember growing up as a kid in Guyana, I was curious as to why a certain statue of a saint was moved from the front of the church to the back of the church, main cathedral. This was a statue of a certain saint, a disciple, who was painted black. When the Catholic Church finally wanted to acknowledge that Jesus and his people are not all white people, they have a token disciple painted in black. They moved from the front of the church, the cathedral, to the back of the cathedral. All that is a decolonization of the mind to the point where even in 2024, many Caribbean citizens are not embracing Haitians as they should. So it's not only a matter of the state incapacity, it's a matter of how the decolonization process has been so successful. Our minds have been conditioned to think in negative terms about Haiti. And it's a constant battle. Not only we lived in Florida for 12 years. They still do have the wet foot, dry foot policy. Come from Cuba, wet foot, you get a dry land. Come from Haiti, wet foot, you go back to wet foot. Elements of that is a reality in parts of the Caribbean. Thankfully, it's changing. Civic organizations in Jamaica are pressing the Jamaican government not to deport Haitians when they come as refugees. So it's a continuous challenge, and I don't see a cutoff point because it's a process of acceptance. Acceptance that there is a capacity limitation upon the state, but acceptance that there is a reality of the citizenry needing to adopt a different view, a more wholesome view.
Yeah, if I might add, so just on a purely personal note, my first wife is Haitian, and so I have long, by way of our friend CLR James, embraced Haiti. And I think it is one of the, Haiti is, in some very real sense, and I think a beacon for CARICOM and the larger Caribbean region. And it is unfortunate that we have not summoned the will that you speak of to really bring the state to bear, the region to bear. So, for example, we're sitting waiting for Kenyans to come to do this job, and it's that CARICOM will, which, in a sense, I see the question, but I wanted to ask one more along this. It's this will. I wanted, CARICOM can't act together to airlift food, to ensure security in Haiti, to help to facilitate a transition to a more normal way of life for people. And I had the thought in reading the book that the other place where CARICOM, in the hurricane season, we can't act collectively to hold on to. And I wondered about your thinking about these problems without passports. And I know that you've written on the environmental side about the environment in this context, and the fact that you focused on the drugs and crime and cybersecurity, and but not the environment as one of those potential challenges.
Let me say two things on that. The four issues that I focus on are not the only issues worthy of attention. I wrote a book in 2020. I edited a book in 2004. And in that book, it's called Caribbean Security in the Age of Terror. I outlined the conceptual framework about security in the Caribbean. That conceptual framework identifies a number of challenge areas. Environment is one of them. And the environment is one of them that is of enduring importance. I didn't attempt to deal with it in this study, but it is there becoming increasingly salient, not only because of hurricanes. You know, there was a volcano eruption in St. Vincent a couple of years ago. I did a study subsequently, and I showed that not only is there a chain of volcanoes in the Caribbean, but there's some underwater volcanoes in the Caribbean. Rising sea level because of global climate change. It's a clear and present issue. So yes, there are environmental clear and present dangers. It happens that I didn't deal with it in this study.
So I think we have. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, please take the mic.
Let me thank you, Dr. Irish Bramber, for this beautiful session this evening. And I know I refused to sit on the stage as you offered me earlier, but I'm delighted to be here. I want to, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me a second to express my gratitude to Dr. Ivelaw Griffith for something that he did for us at Medgar College that is very special and still resonates in my heart. In 2018, I took Dr. Crew, the president, and Maria de Longori to Guyana so that we could talk about cementing a relationship called the USA Caribbean International Education Consortium. And folks, when we got there, Dr. Ivelaw Griffith invited us to his home for a welcome dinner. And it made such a great impression on me and his dear wife that I felt I couldn't leave here this evening without telling you how much I appreciate it. And I regret that all the hard work we had put into creating that consortium went to naught. And I understand it as whenever we engage in something without honest conscience, that's the only way it goes. We were not honest about that. I learned later that this consortium was only created to afford excursions to the region. And so it didn't surprise me. It got me into a lot of trouble. In fact, it got me out of Medgar College for 3.5 years without pay. But that's all right, because that's the price we pay sometimes when we try to be novel. Provost, I want to thank you for your statement in which you recognize the commonality of us here and in the Caribbean. We one people. I'm the chairman of the Bedford-Stuyvesant Health Home Care Agency and the Board of Education, the Board of Trust Directors. And last night I had to go to a funeral for our secretary of the board who died. And when I sat in the church, it's that big Baptist church on Sumter Avenue, 11 Sumter. And I looked at the audience. It made so much sense what you just said. We are all one people. And when we work together, we create a force that could do great things. And I trust that we will work together. Dr. Griffith, let me just say that my good friend Terrence there almost took the question that I had for you, because and thank you, by the way, for those golden nuggets that you presented here tonight. It is some beautiful information. My concern was that I knew as a fact, having worked as a UN ambassador for 5 years, and when I came to Medgar, tried to do programs on Haiti here, I learned from my friend that the US was funding the structure of halfway homes in Haiti, so that when they deport someone here after he served his time, they put him again in prison in Haiti. And when we see what's happening in Haiti today, I wonder in your mind how this kind of injustices foment certain gang behavior that we see. Having said that, before you answer, let me just tell you that I see the whole Caribbean as a society that is on a similar trajectory as Haiti. Because, in my opinion, knowing the Caribbean as I do, we are hypocritical societies. And it is the legacy of colonialism that makes it. Look, in my own country, we still name all the prisons Her Royal Majesty's Jail, Queen's Park, Princess Alice Hospital. We have not decolonized physically and worse mentally. So, yeah, I wanted to ask you, because I was so happy to hear you say that when we're going to measure these crimes, the ultimate measurement is in death. And I've seen so much death, silly death. I watched a thing of a death in Trinidad. Where,
So we gotta wrap the question up.
yeah. So I want you to relate how some of these international crimes impact local rebellious attitude that constitute the street crimes, because that is where the rubber meets the road. When we kill people, what is impacting it? Because all the studies that I've read approach it from a punitive approach crime, from punishment, and few from a sociological understanding of why we commit crimes. So I'd like you to elaborate on that. Thank you.
Well, let me say two things, Eugene. One, there is a nexus between local criminality and international criminality. Even if you were to remove from that portrait the drugs. Part of the criminality sometimes comes with a veneer of entrepreneurship. You go to Haiti right now, well, Haiti about 2 weeks ago, and you tally the number of American businesses paying next to nothing to Haitians. Entrepreneurship, profitability. It's the very perpetration of criminality that fosters a continuous loop of poverty. You have enough to eat, but not enough to eat healthily. You have enough to buy a cell phone, and you are hooked on the services. You're hooked on getting the marketing to get a better model next time. So there's an inestimable link between the two. I don't hold, as you do, the view that Caribbean countries writ large are heading in the direction of Haiti. I think, from my vantage point, there are a number of things about Haiti's condition that are not in the rest of the Caribbean, thankfully. And I know that I've said that we've said a political will is important. Political will is important, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Capacity needs to be matched with that will. And in so many Caribbean jurisdictions, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
All right, we are running short on time, so I'm going to pause this one because I could not let you leave without asking. And I'll say it simply: Venezuela, Guyana, the threat, if you want to talk about a threat to sovereignty and security, your thoughts, your parting thoughts on that crisis in the region.
Some of what I'm about to say, that parents has heard me say before. And I was saying it, some of it just yesterday to Venezuelan journalists at the Atlantic magazine, the story. For Guyana, the Venezuela claim is not just an amorphous claim. It's an existential claim. You may or may not know that the Essequibo is 74% of Guyana. You may or may not know that Jamaica can fit into the Essequibo 14 times. You may or may not know that the Essequibo is bigger than England. You may or may not know that Costa Rica can fit into the Essequibo 3 times. But it is not simply the geographic expanse of the Essequibo that makes it an existential threat. When you ask the question, what are the resource-based elements in the Essequibo? There's a gold there. There's a diamond there. There's a manganese there. There's a bauxite there. Yes, there's oil offshore and onshore there. Essequibo also has manganese and uranium. When now Vice President Barrett Jagdeo was president of Ghana, he paid a visit to Iran at the invitation of President Ahmadinejad. Why? Iran was interested in exploring Guyanese uranium. A certain country said, we're not going to allow that to happen. They need to figure out. So the project of exploiting Guyana's uranium for Iran's purposes never happened. And when you consider that it's not only the resource base in those minerals, but consider the biodiversity that is in there. The Essequibo was part of Guyana, she's part of the Amazon. My wife and I have had the benefit of going to the Essequibo several times, not only for vacation, but to appreciate the rich biodiversity. I remember once walking in the Amazon, we're going on a trail, and I said to the guide who was taking us, what is sapodilla doing in this forest? I said, Vice Chancellor, that's not sapodilla. Those are green heart seeds. It never occurred to me that the massive green heart tree, for which Guyana is famous, starts with a little seed that looks like a sapodilla. So the green heart, the purple heart, all the fabulous woods that are shipped many parts of the world, all that is part of the biodiversity that's given. So the claim by Venezuela that this is La Zona de Reclamación, that they don't want to call it the 24th state, Guyana Essequibo. No. I think the proof is in the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in the eating in regards to what the international community will permit. Could you imagine if Venezuela is allowed to take 74% of Guyana? What it will mean for territorial disputes and claims in around the Americas and around the world. There's a claim by Guatemala against Belize. Guatemala will say, well, hey, Venezuela can take back their thing, we can take back our place. And I was saying to this journalist from Venezuela yesterday, one of the reasons that I'm comforted in the fact that Maduro will not annex physically is because of that leviathan called Brazil. There are 3 ways for Venezuelan troops to get to Guyana. One is through the Atlantic Ocean. My reality check says that they don't have the capabilities yet to do that. One is across the border from the state of Bolívar into Guyana, which is a state adjoining Guyana. The terrain, the geography there would not make moving troops. The most salutary way to do it is to go through Brazil, through the state of Roraima. You go through Roraima, you come into Letem, and you get into Guyana. But guess what? Brazil said, we are not allowing you to use our territory to come into Guyana. But here is an unspoken reality of the Brazil, Guyana, Venezuela dynamic. That very 1899 award implicates Brazil. Because as a result of that 1899 award, Brazil and Guyana and Venezuela met and figured out what is a common, they call it the tri-junction point. So if you change the Guyana-Venezuela border, you better change the Guyana-Brazil border, you gotta change the Brazil-Venezuela border. And guess what? Brazil shares their border with every South American country except Chile and Ecuador. And some of those other countries are not happy with their borders with Brazil. Brazil would not be interested in opening a Pandora's box. It means too many dominoes will fall. So I think that Maduro is playing his own domestic games, having played those games for many years. But I take comfort in the fact that American interests are too significant to allow Venezuela to take what it wants. But let me end with this note. The irony of world politics is as such that now, particularly now that Guyana has oil, and Guyana has a regime that is favorable to capitalism, the Americas are protecting Guyana, keeping Maduro out because Maduro is a bad guy. But Ken, do you know who instigated this whole thing with Venezuela against Guyana?
Tell me.
The United States.
Okay.
President Kennedy made a visit to Caracas in 1961. Okay. Planted the seed in the Venezuelan ear that, you know, this guy, Cherry Jagan in Guyana, has his great communist leanings and is talking with Fidel. We don't want another Castro. You guys need to do something about it. For 63 years, the Venezuelans accepted that award until 1962, following the visit. And the evidence is there. I didn't make this up. The archive material has been released, and it shows the memo from Dean Russ to Kennedy saying that we worked this thing out. We tried to get the Brazilians to push something, the Brazilians said no, but the Venezuelans are. It was the Americans who instigated this thing because they were scared of Jagan becoming Prime Minister of Guyana and the link, the alliance between a communist Jagan and a Fidel Castro. So now the things have turned. You're big supporters of Guyana.
The communist shift.
Ideology is shifting.
All right, thank you very much for that conversation, the lecture and the conversation. At this time, I'd like to invite Provost Coleman to join us on stage. We're going to keep with tradition and present you with a small award. We're going to need a photographer for this. Damon, you've just been appointed as photographer. All right, thank you. Everyone's
My priest would say you would just be the volunteer.
Damien is actually one of my former star students. All right, so the award reads from the Caribbean Research Center, Medgar Evers College of the City University of New York. This is the CRC Speaker Award, which is presented to Dr. Ivelaw Griffith in recognition of his participation in the 2024 CRC Speaker Series, presented on March 27th, 2024. And so, Dr. Griffith, it is our honor to bestow this upon you.
You don't want to keep anybody.
Yes.
Let me help you.
Batman can join us over here. I guess we should turn it this way. Yes, let's do that. Damien, you're in charge now. You tell us when.
Okay. 1, 2, and 3.
Don't move. I believe if you get something, you got to give something. So I've got something.
There you go.
Yes.
Yes.
So from the Griffith family, Met Davis to the provost. I'm delighted to present you a copy of the book for your library.
Just ordered it.
All right, so let's turn it around and let's do that. In fact, you hold on to that and maybe we can do this right here. Sometimes you do.
Okay. Okay.
I think you
Okay.
guys got a book for me in the back. I've got
Okay.
a copy of the book for CRC.
Okay, just on 1, 2, 3, mega.
Mega. All right, hold, stand back, stand back. Let's get that. Thank you, sir.
Compliments of the profession.
Thank you, we truly appreciate it.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, mega.
Mega.
Got it.
Sure.
Yes.
All right.
I'll donate mine.
Wonderful.
But
Thank you.
I'm
Okay.
so I want mine signed.
All right, sure.
So we get your box.
I shouldn't say it.
No, let's leave that. All right, and with that, we are going to, oh yes, I will provide the box and the proper thanking for your award. But I want to thank all of you who joined us in person, those of you who joined us online, and those of you who will, join us in the future through the replay. Please keep an eye out for future programming from the Caribbean Research Center, and if you are joining us online, please subscribe and follow. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
For those of you who are in-house, I want to make a special offer, if I can get back there. We are conducting question. All right, thank you, everyone. There are refreshments outside. Please help yourselves. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Good to see you.